Silence is communication. Most people misunderstand this fundamental truth. They think silence is the absence of meaning, the absence of intention, the absence of feeling. But silence is its own language, one that often says far more than words ever could. When a man goes quiet for days or weeks, it's easy to imagine that nothing is happening, that there's simply a void. But in that void lies a message, a signal, a revelation about who he is, what he feels, what he's willing or unwilling to face. We live in a world that worships words. We think if someone isn't speaking, they have nothing to say. But silence is rarely neutral. Silence is often avoidance. Silence is conflict that is hidden away. Silence can be fear that has no name yet. Silence can be strategy, manipulation, or even cowardice. It can be shame. It can be guilt. It can be confusion. When he goes silent for weeks, there is something inside him that refuses to meet you, to meet itself. Silence is not empty. It is full of meaning. He refuses to articulate. But here's what most people do. They panic in the face of silence. They rush to fill the space with frantic energy. They send long texts. They leave voicemails. They demand answers. They over-explain themselves. Imagine they must have offended him or scared him away. Their mind spins 100 catastrophic theories. He must hate me. He's lost interest. He found someone better. I'm not good enough. But these conclusions say more about the person thinking them than about the man who went silent. His silence becomes the screen on which you project your worst fears. This is because humans hate uncertainty. The brain would rather have a painful explanation than none at all. We want resolution. We want answers. But the reality is, sometimes silence is the answer. Sometimes silence is the truth. It's a person showing you they don't know how to talk, or they don't want to talk, or they don't feel safe enough to talk, or they don't care enough to talk. Sometimes it's because they don't even know what they feel themselves. Silence can be conflict avoidance. It can be emotional immaturity. It can be fear of vulnerability. It can be passive aggression. It can be punishment. It can be a way to gain power over you. Or it can be complete confusion and paralysis. The important thing to understand is this: silence is never meaningless. It is never blank. It always says something about the person choosing it. When you learn to see silence as communication, you take back your power. Instead of letting your mind invent horror stories about your own inadequacy, you can step back and study the silence objectively. You can ask yourself, what does this choice of silence tell me about him? About his emotional capacity, about how he handles conflict, about what he is willing to share. And you begin to see the truth. His silence is a mirror of him, not of you. This is a radical shift in perception. It frees you from self-blame. You stop thinking, if only I were prettier, smarter, more interesting, he wouldn't be silent. Instead, you think, this is how he deals with his emotions. This is how he handles discomfort. This is how he shows up or fails to show up. And you learn to believe what people show you, not what you wish they would show you. But it goes deeper. Silence as communication also forces you to look at your own relationship with discomfort. Why does his silence bother you so much? Why do you feel so anxious when someone withdraws? What wound does it poke at? Abandonment? Rejection? Fear of being unloved? When you see silence as a message, not just from him, but from life, it becomes an invitation to examine yourself. His silence triggers your insecurity. But that insecurity was always there. His silence is simply the flashlight revealing it. And here's where your growth begins. Instead of reacting compulsively to the silence, texting, pleading, overanalyzing, you pause. You ask, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Is this really about him or is it about me? You learn to hold your own emotional chaos. You learn to soothe yourself. You develop resilience. You build the capacity to sit with not knowing, with uncertainty, with disappointment. That is power. Because now you're not at the mercy of someone else's communication style. You're not trapped in the roller coaster of their hot and cold attention. You're centered, grounded, capable of saying, this silence tells me something about him. And now I get to choose what I do with that information. Silence is communication, yes, but it's also a test of whether you will betray yourself for someone else's approval, a test of whether you will lose your dignity for crumbs of connection, a test of whether you will give your peace away because someone else refuses to speak. When you understand that silence speaks, you listen differently. You stop making excuses for people who refuse to explain themselves. You stop overcompensating for their emotional immaturity. You stop accepting the bare minimum. You start holding people to higher standards, not because you're unkind, but because you're clear. Clear about what you want. Clear about what you will and won't accept. Clear about what kind of relationship you're building. This clarity is hard won. It doesn't come overnight. It comes when you learn to sit in the quiet with yourself, listen to your own heart, your own fear, your own longing. It comes when you learn to fill your own silence with self-acknowledge, self-compassion, self-respect. So the next time a man goes silent for weeks, remind yourself, he is communicating. He's telling you something he may not even understand about himself. And your job isn't to decode him or rescue him or fix him. Your job is to hear what that silence says and decide what you're going to do with that truth. Emotional distance often reflects internal conflict. When someone withdraws, when they pull back without explanation, when they vanish into silence for days or weeks, it's easy to see that as a direct rejection of you. It feels personal, sharp like a blade. You wonder what you did wrong. You wonder if you're too much, too demanding, too emotional, or not enough. Not interesting enough, not attractive enough, not worthy enough. That's the reflex most of us have. We assume their distance is a judgment of our value. But the truth is, emotional distance usually says far more about the person who is withdrawing than about the person who is being pushed away. We don't like to think that way because it feels safer to believe we can control it. If it's about us, we can fix it, right? If we just act differently, if we become quieter, kinder, sexier, more agreeable, maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll open up. So we bend ourselves out of shape trying to close the gap. We write long messages explaining ourselves, apologizing for things that weren't even wrong. We replay every interaction in our heads, hunting for our mistakes. We ask friends for advice. What do you think I did? It's all an attempt to manage their internal world. But that's a losing game. Because emotional distance is often not about anything you did at all. It's about what's happening inside them. It's about their own fear of being seen too closely, of being vulnerable. It's about their discomfort with intimacy. Some people want connection badly, but when they get too close, their alarms go off. Old wounds, past betrayals, fears of inadequacy, they all come rushing up. And instead of talking about it, instead of showing the messy truth, they retreat. Silence is easier than admission. Avoidance is safer than exposure. Others use distance as a way to maintain power. They learned somewhere along the way that they can control the emotional temperature of the relationship by withdrawing affection. When you lean in, they lean back. It keeps you chasing them. It keeps them from having to be accountable. It's a subtle form of manipulation that allows them to set the terms without saying a word. Still others are genuinely confused, battling private conflicts they don't want to share. They may be depressed, anxious, or overwhelmed. They may be carrying secrets they're ashamed of. They may not even know why they feel compelled to disappear. But their silence is real. Their distance is real, and it is not yours to solve. The hardest thing to accept is that you don't control what other people are ready or able to deal with. You don't get to choose their level of emotional maturity. You can't force someone to talk who isn't ready to speak. You can't make someone process their trauma if they'd rather bury it. You can't make someone love you in a healthy way if they don't know how. This is where so much suffering comes from. Because you see their potential. You remember the good moments. You hold on to what you think they could be if they'd only open up. And so you wait, you hope, you justify, you accept less than you need. But potential is not reality. A person's ability to connect is defined not by their best moments, but by how they show up when it's hard, when it's uncomfortable, when conflict or vulnerability is on the table. If someone goes silent for weeks, that's how they handle discomfort. That's how they manage relational stress. That's their way of regulating themselves. And while you can have empathy for that, you can recognize they might be scared, hurt, overwhelmed. It doesn't mean you have to accept it. Compassion doesn't mean self-abandonment. Part of emotional discipline is learning to separate your feelings about someone from their actual behavior. You can care about someone deeply and still recognize that their distance is unhealthy. You can feel empathy for their struggles and still choose not to let them harm you with their silence. You can understand their fear of closeness and still decide you won't lower your standard for honest communication. This requires tremendous self-awareness. You have to be willing to face your own reflexes. Why do you want so badly to close the gap? Why do you think it's your responsibility to make them open up? Why do you feel that their silence is proof of your unworthiness? Those beliefs don't start with them. They're old patterns, old wounds, old scripts you've been living out for years. So when you're faced with someone else's emotional distance, use it as a mirror. What does it reveal about your own discomfort with uncertainty, about your need for control, about your fear of being alone, about your tendency to derive your worth from being chosen? Instead of chasing them, turn inward. Tend to the parts of you that want to chase. Soothe the parts of you that are terrified of loss. Learn to hold space for your own fear and sadness without making them responsible for fixing it. Emotional distance is a teacher. It shows you the places where you're vulnerable to self-doubt, where you've given your power away. It challenges you to stay grounded in your own worth, even when someone else refuses to validate it. It forces you to decide, will I betray myself for the chance to keep someone who won't even talk to me? Or will I choose to honor my need for safety, honesty, and connection, even if it means letting them go? Understanding that emotional distance often reflects internal conflict doesn't excuse it. It simply explains it. And when you see it clearly, you stop taking it so personally. You stop fighting reality. You stop trying to drag someone into emotional intimacy they're not prepared for. You learn to respect their choice to stay silent, even as you respect your own choice to walk away from it. Don't personalize it. This is one of the most important disciplines you can ever learn when dealing with relationships, and especially when facing silence, withdrawal, or emotional distance from someone you care about. Because the reflex to personalize is so strong, so automatic, that it can feel like truth. When someone goes silent on you, your mind immediately leaps to blame. You imagine you did something to deserve it. You replay conversations searching for the moment you messed up. You scrutinize every word you texted. You wonder if you were too needy, too cold, too open, too closed. The mind is relentless in its hunt for evidence that you are the problem. But this reflex doesn't come out of nowhere. It's rooted in the way many of us learn to make sense of the world as children. When you were young and someone important to you withdrew affection, maybe a parent got angry and gave you the cold shoulder, or punished you with silence, or seemed disappointed in you without explaining why. You were too small to understand it wasn't about you. Children don't have the perspective to see that adults can be flawed, scared, overwhelmed, or emotionally immature. So you made it your fault. It was safer to believe you could change yourself to get love back than to face the terrifying truth that you couldn't control them. That childhood survival strategy becomes a habit that follows you into adulthood. When someone withdraws, your mind still wants to explain it in terms of your failure. You make it mean you're unlovable, that you push them away, that you are fundamentally defective. Because if you can identify the flaw in yourself, you believe you can fix it. And if you can fix it, you won't have to face loss or abandonment. But this is an illusion of control that only deepens your pain. Personalizing someone else's silence or distance means you carry their emotional burden on your shoulders. You become responsible not only for your own feelings, but for theirs. You take on the job of trying to figure them out, soothe them, change them, rescue them from their own avoidance. And you abandon yourself in the process. Your needs for honesty, clarity, and connection get buried under the desperate quest to win them back or to get them to explain themselves. What if you stop doing that? What if you refuse to make their silence mean anything about you? Imagine the relief, the freedom, the space to breathe. Because the truth is, their behavior says so much more about them than it does about you. Silence is a choice. Emotional distance is a pattern. And it often has roots in their own fears, defenses, wounds, or limitations that you cannot see or fix. Maybe they were taught to shut down rather than talk. Maybe they fear conflict so much they'd rather disappear than be honest. Maybe they don't have the emotional vocabulary to express themselves. Maybe they are trying to maintain power. Or maybe they are genuinely lost and don't know what they want. None of that is about your worth. None of that is proof you failed. None of that is an indictment of your value as a partner, friend, or human being. It's about their readiness, their willingness, their capacity to show up in a real way. And that's on them. When you stop personalizing, you create the conditions to see clearly. You can look at their behavior and ask, is this something I'm willing to accept in my life? Instead of, how do I fix myself to get them to stop? You reclaim the power to choose instead of pleading to be chosen. You become able to set boundaries based on reality, not fantasy. Personalizing their silence keeps you stuck in loops of self-attack. You start policing your words and actions, afraid to say anything that might make them leave again. You shrink yourself. You trade authenticity for safety. You abandon your own truth for the hope of keeping them close. But closeness achieved through self-erasure is not real closeness. It's dependency, it's fear, it's bondage. Refusing to personalize doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're cold or indifferent. It means you care enough about yourself to maintain your integrity even when someone else withdraws. It means you're willing to sit with the pain of not knowing, the discomfort of uncertainty, the ache of loss, without turning it into proof that you're unworthy of love. This is not easy work. It requires vigilance. Your mind will try to slip back into old patterns. It will whisper, it's you, you're the problem, you need to be better. You will have to learn to recognize that voice and gently but firmly say, no, their silence is not my shame to carry. You will have to soothe the part of you that feels terrified of rejection. You will have to learn how to hold yourself kindly when you're hurting rather than outsourcing that job to someone who refuses to show up. By refusing to personalize, you create room to respond rather than react. Instead of chasing them down or apologizing for imaginary sins, you can say, I see what you're choosing. I see what you're capable of giving. And I get to decide if that aligns with what I want. You develop discernment. You learn to trust your own perceptions. You become someone who can face the reality of another person's limits without making it a referendum on your worth. And most importantly, you come home to yourself. Because you no longer give your power away to anyone who can't or won't meet you with honesty. You stand firm in the knowledge that you are worthy of real connection and that you will not twist yourself into knots trying to earn what should be given freely. You realize that the story their silence tells is about them and that the story you choose to tell about yourself is entirely up to you. Focus on self-mastery. This is the heart of the entire process, the turning point where you reclaim the energy you've been pouring into trying to control or interpret someone else's silence and direct it back into yourself. When someone goes silent for weeks, it's natural to obsess over them. Your mind circles them like prey, analyzing every word they said before they disappeared, replaying every moment you shared, guessing at reasons for their withdrawal. You wake up thinking about them. You go to sleep wondering what they're doing. Your emotional life becomes completely entangled with theirs, even though they aren't even talking to you. That's the tragedy of unmastered emotion. It gives your power to someone who isn't even present. Self-mastery is the opposite of that. It is the discipline of choosing to invest your energy where it will actually bear fruit, in yourself. It's not about denying your feelings or pretending you don't care. It's about learning to hold those feelings with wisdom instead of letting them control you. When someone disappears or withdraws, you will feel pain. You'll feel confusion, you'll feel anger, sadness, fear, even longing. That's real. Self-mastery doesn't mean those emotions vanish. It means you don't let them run the show. It means you sit with them. You learn from them. You refuse to let them make your decisions for you. Most people don't want to do this work. They want the other person to come back and soothe them instead. They want the conversation that will make the pain stop. They want the apology, the explanation, the confession of love that will end the uncertainty. But when you need someone else to regulate your emotional world, you are always at their mercy. You're like a puppet waiting for them to pull the strings. Self-mastery is about cutting those strings. It's about saying, I am the caretaker of my own emotional landscape. When you feel abandoned, you learn to comfort yourself. When you feel worthless, you remind yourself of your inherent value. When you feel furious, you allow the anger to move through you without using it to destroy yourself or others. You become a compassionate observer of your own emotional storms instead of being swept away by them. But it's not only about calming yourself, it's also about clarity. When someone goes silent for weeks, it's easy to romanticize them. You imagine they're wrestling with deep feelings. You tell yourself they're scared of how much they love you. You invent reasons to excuse their absence because the alternative is too painful, that they don't care enough to talk to you, or they don't know how to face you. Self-mastery demands you see things as they are, not as you wish they would be. It asks you to look at the truth of their behavior without sugarcoating it, because only with that clear-eyed view can you make choices that serve your well-being. Focusing on self-mastery means asking hard questions. Why do I want someone who won't even talk to me? Why am I waiting for them? What does this longing reveal about what I believe I deserve, about how I see love, about how I see myself? These are confronting questions. They might reveal wounds that are older than this relationship. Maybe you're reenacting childhood patterns where you had to earn love through patience, silence, or perfection. Maybe you've confused longing with love because it's what you know. This is the deeper work. Self-mastery isn't a technique, it's a path. It's the process of meeting your own needs in healthy ways so you stop outsourcing your worth to people who won't even speak to you. It's learning to enjoy your own company so you stop accepting breadcrumbs of connection. It's developing your interests, goals, and dreams so your life isn't defined by who stays or who goes. It also means knowing when to let go. When someone's silence is chronic, when they use distance to punish or manipulate, when they refuse to talk about what's happening. Self-mastery means you don't keep offering them unlimited chances. You don't let your hope override your standards. You recognize that love without respect isn't love, that communication without honesty is empty, that connection without safety is chaos. Focusing on self-mastery means you become the kind of person who can handle discomfort without losing yourself. You learn to wait and see instead of rushing to fix or chase. You can hold space for other people's struggles without making them your responsibility. You develop the patience to let things unfold as they will, knowing that you have your own back no matter what. This isn't about building walls. It's about building strength. You don't have to become cold or indifferent. You can be warm, open, loving, and also firm in what you will and won't accept. You can be compassionate toward others and still insist on being treated well. Self-mastery is what makes that balance possible. It gives you the freedom to choose your responses instead of being ruled by old wounds or fears. It transforms rejection into redirection. It turns the pain of someone's silence into an opportunity to listen to yourself more deeply, to know yourself more fully, to love yourself more fiercely. Control the narrative in your mind. This is the essential practice that determines whether you find peace or stay trapped in suffering when someone you care about goes silent for weeks. The human mind is a meaning-making machine. It can't stand uncertainty. It will fill in the blanks, even if it has no real evidence. When someone withdraws, your mind scrambles to explain it, and too often it writes the most painful, self-blaming story possible. It tells you he went silent because you're not good enough, because you scared him away, because you're too much, too little, too needy, too demanding. It's like your own thoughts turn against you, weaponizing his silence to confirm your deepest insecurities. But this is just one possible narrative, and a destructive one. The truth is, you don't actually know what his silence means. You can guess, you can speculate, but unless he tells you, you don't know. And yet your mind acts as if your worst case scenario is the truth. It's like a movie it insists on playing on repeat. Scenes of him forgetting you, laughing with someone new, deciding you're not worth the effort. This mental storytelling is not neutral. It has consequences. It shapes your emotions. It intensifies your anxiety. It breaks your own heart. over and over again without any new information. Controlling the narrative doesn't mean lying to yourself or inventing fairy tales to avoid pain. It means refusing to accept every thought that pops into your head as fact. It means questioning the catastrophizing voice. It means stepping back from the flood of fearful interpretations and asking, what else could be true? What do I know for sure? What story serves me better? Maybe his silence says he's overwhelmed with personal issues he won't discuss. Maybe he's conflict avoidant. Maybe he's not mature enough to have a hard conversation. Maybe he doesn't know how he feels. Or maybe he is losing interest. The point isn't to spin it positively no matter what. The point is to see there are many possibilities and that none of them reduce your value. Controlling the narrative is also about refusing to make his behavior mean something about your worth. Because this is the reflex that causes so much pain. You take his choice to go silent and turn it into a verdict. I'm unlovable. I'm not enough. I'm not wanted. But his silence is a reflection of his coping mechanisms, his fears, his habits, not your intrinsic value. Someone else's inability or unwillingness to communicate is not proof that you're undeserving of love. It's proof that they aren't capable or willing to give you the kind of relationship you want. When you control the narrative, you reclaim your power. You move from asking, why doesn't he want me, to asking, do I want someone who can't even talk to me? You stop framing yourself as the rejected party who must grovel for answers and start seeing yourself as someone with agency, with choices. You begin to understand that you are not at the mercy of his silence. You get to decide what that silence means for you. And you get to decide what that silence means for you. Does it mean you wait? Does it mean you confront? Does it mean you walk away? Controlling the narrative also means managing how much mental real estate you give the situation. Because if you're not careful, you'll find yourself thinking about him constantly. Every quiet moment is filled with fantasies about what he's doing, who he's with, whether he'll come back. Your own life fades into the background. Your goals, your hobbies, your friendships all get neglected because you're too busy running mental simulations of his motives. This is how silence becomes a kind of prison you build in your own mind. But you can choose differently. You can say, I don't know why he's silent, but I refuse to let it dominate my thoughts. You can choose to focus on your own life, to pour your energy into your work, your health, your creativity, your connections with people who actually show up. You can choose to be present for yourself instead of obsessing over someone who isn't present for you. Controlling the narrative also requires compassion for yourself and for them. For yourself, because it's painful to feel abandoned or confused and you deserve your own kindness. For them, because silence often masks pain, fear, or confusion they don't know how to handle. Compassion doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or accepting less than you need. It means recognizing that everyone has their own struggles and that those struggles aren't yours to fix. When you control the narrative in your mind, you become resilient. You're no longer thrown into chaos every time someone else withdraws. You can hold your own center. You can let their silence speak for itself without needing to rewrite yourself to earn their words. You can stand firmly in the truth that your worth is not negotiable, not conditional on someone else's willingness to acknowledge it. You can honor your own needs and feelings without making them wrong or excessive. You can decide what kind of relationship you want and refuse to settle for one defined by silence and guessing games. Grow through the gap. When someone pulls away, when they disappear into silence for weeks without warning or explanation, it creates a gap, not just between you and them, but within yourself. That emotional distance leaves a space that used to be filled with their presence, their attention, their words. And the instinctive reaction to that space is fear. We rush to fill it We beg for answers. We imagine ways to close the distance, to patch the hole, to go back to what was. But this gap is not just a void. It's an invitation, a challenge, a crucible. It's the place where your next version of yourself begins to take shape, if you're willing to grow through it. That growth does not come easily. At first, the gap feels unbearable. It triggers every abandonment wound. It stirs up insecurities you thought you had healed. You find yourself questioning your worth, your attractiveness, your value as a person. You wonder if you were too much, too intense, too emotional, too demanding. You wonder if you weren't enough, if you were boring, unworthy, forgettable. This is the pain of the gap. It surfaces everything you've buried under distractions and validations. And that's why most people run from it. They try to distract themselves with other people, with new conversations, with false closures. But if you can resist that urge, if you can sit in the space and face the ache, that's where the transformation begins. Because that emotional space is not just empty, it's fertile. It gives you the chance to meet yourself without noise, without anyone else's opinions, without the false comfort of superficial connection. And when you're finally alone with yourself, when you stop reaching outward for validation, you start to ask real questions. Not how do I get them back, but what do I need to heal in myself? Not what was wrong with me, but why did I accept their inconsistency in the first place? Not how can I make them stay, but why did I give so much power to someone who could leave so easily? Growing through the gap means using this emotional silence as feedback. It's not feedback about your value. It's feedback about what still lives inside you. About the unhealed parts that cling to unavailable people. About the pieces of you that equate being chosen with being worthy. About the belief that your worth is tied to someone's presence in your life. And once you see these things, you can't unsee them. You become conscious, awake, and with that awareness, you start to shift. Instead of chasing closure from someone who won't give it, you create your own. You look at what was, and you name it truthfully. You stop romanticizing their silence. You stop explaining away their absence. You stop pretending that their withdrawal was noble or poetic. You start seeing it for what it is, a signal. A signal that they lack the tools, the maturity, or the desire to maintain a healthy emotional connection. And you stop making that mean anything about your lovability. As you grow through the gap, your identity starts to change. You stop seeing yourself as someone who was left behind and start seeing yourself as someone who let go. You stop viewing yourself as a victim of someone's silence and start viewing yourself as a survivor of your own self-neglect. Because now you're listening to yourself. You're hearing the quiet voice inside that always knew what you needed, even when you ignored it. You're honoring the part of you that craved consistency, emotional availability, and depth. And more importantly, you're giving those things to yourself. Growth isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It's choosing not to send the message you used to send. It's saying no to the old dynamic you used to tolerate. It's making a plan for your life that doesn't include waiting for them to return. It's showing up for yourself in small, deliberate ways. By setting boundaries. By speaking your truth. By refusing to chase anyone who disappears on you. It's deciding that the gap they left behind will not become a wound but a window. A window through which you meet your most powerful self. And the beauty of it is, as you grow through the gap, you begin to outgrow them. The person you were when you needed their attention so badly starts to fade. You become stronger, wiser, more grounded. You stop craving their validation because you've learned how to validate yourself. You stop needing their explanation because you've written your own narrative. You stop waiting for them to return because the person you've become would no longer settle for what they gave. The gap they left becomes sacred, not because of what they did or didn't do, but because of what it awakened in you. It was never about them. It was about the parts of you that needed to be seen, healed, strengthened. It was about the inner work you would have never done if they had kept texting, kept calling, kept pretending to show up. Their silence gave you a gift, not the kind you wanted, but the kind you needed. A gift that pushed you inward, a gift that challenged your dependency, a gift that forced you to become whole without them. Growing through the gap means realizing you didn't lose them. You released what wasn't meant for the future version of you. The version that sets higher standards. The version that protects her peace. The version that doesn't beg for love but embodies it. The version that rises not in spite of the silence, but because of it.